South Africa is due for a review by the Financial Action Task Force in February 2023. The FTF is the international body which evaluates steps by governments to prevent illicit financial flows, terrorism, financing and money laundering. And of course, South Africa knows this quite well, and that is why it is trying to bring about a whole set of system that can bring about a change and of course make it avoid being grey listed. And so we just go to our guest for this particular segment, and that is Clive Ramathibela Smith, a business and market analyst, Hectare Capital and Partners. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
So let's quickly touch down on the issues now. If South Africa is grey listed, it will affect its GDP, costing up to about 3%. What does that mean for the country's economy?
Obviously, these are very, very serious matters that we're discussing, which could be very negative for the South African industry, for the South African economy as a whole. But it's no surprise. These are the type of capitalist measures that if you want to keep up with the rest of the world, you need to make sure that you adhere to the financial instruments and financial regulations and policies that are applied. Very interestingly, the Johannesburg Securities Exchange it was at one point at the top 5 of the best bourses around the world. And what has crippled it is some of the irregularities. I'm sure you'll remember the story of Steinhoff, or Steinheist as it's called now, where multi-billion rands were lost in the company Steinhoff, which was a listed entity on the JSE. And not only that, recently we've been flagged for terrorism activity that's happening in the country. The US abruptly warned of a Sentin bombing that might happen or a terrorist attack that might happen. All these are indications that the financial system is weakening internally in South Africa because obviously regulations are not being adhered to accordingly. Companies like Steinhoff can get away with such things. And recently, the state capture that we can mention as well, where the Gupta brothers made a running with the financial system in South Africa, being able to broker and launder such billions and billions of rands out of the country. All these leave gaps, and it means that obviously the financial system is not strong enough to be able to mitigate the risks that are required in the world international financial system of things. And hence the reason now we might take a risk of being grey listed because we haven't been quite stringent in making sure that we adhere to those principles.
Coupled with your summation, the AFTF says that South Africa has been found wanting in 11 of its recommended measures when it comes to combating terrorism and, of course, finances and money laundering. What critical steps do you think South Africa needs to take now to change the narrative and, of course, avoid being grey listed?
I'm sure this channel knows me by now that I'm very, very critical of some of the financial systems that are required because I think they're still very colonial and they're out of touch with reality. But because Africa as a whole, South Africa, Nigeria, and some of the big industrial countries on the continent have failed to create a system that can be sustained by themselves so that they can be more competitive, we now have to adhere to global standards, which are normally lopsided and support European or American companies more than they would support a country like South Africa, which is an emerging industrial country. So these measures are important. I'm not saying that we should ignore regulations, but I'm saying that for a developing market, for a developing country, some of it are so stringent that they could actually cripple the way the country does business, particularly for small, medium enterprises, and how we trade on the African continent as well. So now we have to live up to these standards. But you know what it reminds me of, just to get off a little bit and make an example, it's like this climate change, for example. We're expected to meet the regulatory framework which Europe and America have taken advantage of for decades and decades, and even centuries, if you'd like.
Hello, Clive.
Industrialization.
Hello, Clive.
Now we're expected to be carbon-free. How do you do that in a country that is relying on coal for its electricity, like South Africa, of economy? And the question is it worth it? Not just that we are said to be grey listed simply because we aren't able to meet the standard operating procedures that are required by the international financial system.
Okay, Clive, I perceive that you have a lot going on in there in your chest that you are willing to let out. But we are going to peg the conversation there for now and try to engage you some other time, because we also want to consider what the acting Director General of South Africa's National Treasury is doing when he says that they are looking at conversing with the authorities to bring up a legislation to deal with the perceived weaknesses that you have mentioned. But that's going to be in another conversation. Thank you so much, Clive, for joining us this morning. All right, we just move on now. We go on a quick break because we are pressed for time. We'll just take you through NC4 to watch after this.